website, you obviously see we have had speakers come to the campus in the past, but now in this COVID pandemic time, basically we're doing it all virtually. So we're bringing you a variety of folks. The idea of these is that they're over lunch, so you should be able to do it while you're eating. They'll be quick and dirty. We have a few that'll vary from that, but this first one, we'll try to get you out of here at the end of the hour so that you can get back to whatever else you were doing. Before we kind of get into it, we'll try to do some Q&A at the end. We're not going to talk for the entire time. It's just too much to take in, I think. But if things come up that you need to know, or for some reason something starts to go weird and you can't see, or there's whatever, feel free to use the chat. And then once we get done at the end, we can either take questions by chat or by having people use their mics, whatever people feel comfortable with. But for now, let's go ahead and start. So the very first of our speaker series in this virtual format is called Serious Games and Personalized Learning. And so the idea behind it is, education can be fun, but there's a lot more to it than that. So, but first, let's go ahead and meet the speakers. So I'm one of them. I'm James Casey. If you don't know me, I got my master's at Virginia Tech, and then I worked for Electronic Arts in various forms and fashion, mostly as a producer, making mobile games and massively multiplayer online games for quite a while. Then I came to George Mason University, where I am the Associate Director of the Virginia Serious Games Institute. And I also teach in the program for computer game design. And I'm a co-author on the book, Serious Games and Personalized Learning, which we'll be talking about, along with Stephanie Kane.
Hi, I'm Stephanie Kane. I got my bachelor's degree in history from George Mason University. I am the research coordinator for the Vsgi currently. I used to be the admin assistant in operations and finance. I'm also currently a graduate student in game design, and I also wrote one of the chapters for Serious Games in Personalized Learning. I've been with George Mason University, not counting my education, for about 10 years now.
Excellent. Thank you. So with that said, here's our agenda. We know who's talking, and now you need to know what we're talking about. So the first thing we're going to do is define serious games and personalized learning, give you kind of the broad picture. What is the book that we are co-authors about? And then we're going to each speak a little bit about what we have contributed to the book. And then from there, we're going to talk about what it was like writing a book of this type. This is first for both of us. Our main co-author, Scott Martin, who's listening in somewhere and wrote a book somewhere back here, he has done it before, but this was new to us. So it's going to be something that we're going to talk about and what's involved and the process. And then finally, we're just going to open it up and open the floor to questions. So with that in mind, what exactly is serious games and personalized learning? So we're going to break that down. And I'm going to talk about serious games. If you haven't heard us talk about this before, and a lot of you probably have, but if you haven't, you're probably familiar with all the games out there, the entertainment games, the video games, whatever you want to call them, right? The Fortnites, whatever is popular right now, Among Us, or whatever it is that you're playing, or your kids are playing, or other kids are playing. They're designed for entertainment. But serious games, that's not their primary goal. Their primary goal is simulation or education or persuasion, passing along knowledge, right? But to be effective, to be like entertainment games, they still need to be engaging, and that helps the whole process. And so that's what we mean when we talk about serious games. And now Stephanie's going to quickly go over what we mean about personalized learning.
So basically, the whole thing about personalized learning is that obviously everybody has different learning styles. Everybody learns at different paces and more effectively in different ways. And everyone, of course, finds different things entertaining. We all like different types of movies, different types of games, different types of music. And all of these individualized things make us who we are. And the problem that we face is that education is so uniform. Everything is just the way it is, and it's really not it's really not made for people who fit outside that box, which is in some way everybody. And so we wanted to look to see if we could get serious games, and maybe figure out if serious games could change how we look at education, and maybe try to figure out if we could find a way to meet everybody where they are without really taking anything away in any other aspects. And so it was a really fascinating thing to look at that way.
Excellent. And so, just so you know, because we're going to talk about bits and pieces of this book, the full book, Serious Games and Personalized Learning, New Models for Design and Performance. I know it's a long title, just flows off the tongue, has a lot of different stuff to offer. And so we talk about science of learning, we talk about AI, we talk about this whole concept that we just talked about, personalized learning, where games and learning came from, right? The history and what's been done and why that's important. Because, you know, the old adage, you got to learn from history, right? Or you're going to repeat it. And we've made a lot of mistakes in education over the years. But we've also, there's concrete stuff for us to build upon. And the things that we've learned are huge. And so then I'm going to talk a little bit about my chapter, Teaching and Learning Game Design. Stephanie's going to talk about her chapter, the Vsgi learning game examples. And then in the book, there's also a look towards the future. How do we take these new technologies like artificial intelligence, machine learning, you know, apply this to not only personalized learning, but serious games and the entire learning process. So it's going to be a great book. It's still being written. It's going to be published by Routledge. And obviously when it gets done, we're all going to be happy to send out links and have you guys go out and get it and learn from it. But for now, we're going to talk about our individual chapters. So with that in mind, what did we do? Well, my chapter was all about teaching and learning game design. And so there's a lot of stuff there. And I know this isn't the most, you know, exciting of the slides because it doesn't have pictures and all that, but I'm going to talk to you about what we did. And so in our chapters, we tried to fill it with, you know, antidotes and things that, you know, that we can bring from our own experiences and our own lives to kind of bring all this research together, because some of this stuff is pretty heady, right? Like the first thing we talk about in the chapter is, you know, this whole idea of, whoops, there we go, of human cognitive capacity and balance, right? And it's like, how do people learn? How do people take in information and process it? And what are the elements that affect whether somebody's able to learn properly? And there's a lot of different elements that kind of go into that. And it's both external and internal things that kind of affect how we learn. But I mean, I'm sure all of us at one point or another, you know, have felt like our brain is full, like we can't learn anymore, right? Or whatever they're throwing at us, you know, like there's too much stuff. And I've seen that a lot in this online environment. It's like, oh my gosh, there's just throwing so much stuff at us now. And that balancing act between like what is too little, what is too much, that's really the crux of this whole idea of cognitive balance, right? And so that's the first thing we kind of go over. And then we shift gears in the chapter to talk about flow. And if you have never heard about flow before, it applies in multiple fields, but in games, it's this kind of concept of making sure the game keeps you in almost an elated state, right? You want something that challenges you, but not too little and not too much. And so by getting that kind of balance right between them, you enter this flow state. You know, it's like you're playing and everything just clicks and you're having fun. And then all of a sudden it's hours later and you realize you have to go to class or work or whatever the case may be. And it's that flow. And so there's this natural kind of fit in taking flow and cognitive balance, right? So we don't want to send too much information to you to learn, and we don't want to send too little, because if something's super easy, people tend to, you know, zone out and things like that, right? You always hear about that, like, oh, why are they a troublemaker? Because it's too easy for me. It doesn't make any sense. And likewise, the same thing. If it's too hard, people don't pay attention or learn. So it's making that balance that's extremely important. And so in the chapter, then we move to entertainment games, and we take a long look at how entertainment games attempt to achieve this flow in various ways. And it's really important because everybody's motivation's different. You know, type of games that are out there are different. what each game brings to, like I play first person shooters or puzzle games or whatever. Each of them brings different types of challenges and they don't appeal to everybody, and but getting that engagement in games is an art form at this point. If we can transfer that knowledge into what we do in education and serious games, then we will make people learn better. We will persuade them better. We will simulate better. And so that's really the crux of the what we show off in here. And we go through a lot of different examples. And from there, we actually shift into, like, if you've ever played games, there's always ones that do the user experience or the user interface very well. It's like, oh, it's just, you don't even notice it. It's like you're in the world. And there's other ones where it's like, oh my gosh, I got to do this and I got to click here and I got to click here and I got to click here, and it's an exercise in frustration, right? And so we talk about what are these principles that you can apply to learning and games and serious games to make it effective, make it engaging. And so we look at those as case studies. And then we kind of go over, ultimately with the serious game, how do we assess this? How do we know you learned, right? It's like, hey, look, here's a game that teaches you about the Civil War. But at the end of the day, how do we assess that you can, go through the whole Bloom's taxonomy, right? I understand it, I can apply it, I can create based on this knowledge. Like all these different levels of, how do people learn and access their knowledge? We have to actually make sure that that's happening, because at its simplest form, oh yeah, we can teach you 1 + 1 is equal to 2, but can you take that knowledge and extrapolate and go beyond that? Start solving all those weird social ones, media ones, where they're like 8 times whatever under parentheses, under like, crazy stuff, right? And then finally, after we talk about some of these principles of designing the games, we also look at how we can then take technology. Like, I did multiplayer games for most of my career in entertainment games, right? They bring a whole new level, because it's not just you learning, it's other people learning with you. You're exploring together, you're coming up with problems together, you're collaborating. And how do we incorporate that in so that it mimics a classroom, right? You don't learn on your own in most classrooms, although these days in the pandemic, it seems like that, it feels like that. But the really good programs are the ones that try to basically mimic that multiplayer, that synchronous feeling, that learning with others, learning from others. It's not just a teacher teaching or a game teaching. It's you're learning not only from the game, but from each other. And it's amazing what people have learned from making MMOs. And I know the few people on here that have worked with me on them. You learn a lot as a developer of games too, about people and their motivations by making these types of multiplayer games. And so this chapter is all about learning from entertainment games and applying that to what we know about learning, education, etc. And so that's really kind of a quick overview of the chapter. It's much longer, tons of pages, lots of references, etc. And now I'm going to turn it over and let Stephanie talk a little bit about her chapter. Flip over here there we go. And there you go, Stephanie, all yours.
So I was tasked with checking out a few case studies of VSGI companies, and I was really excited to do it because I've been with the VSGI from the beginning. So I got to see all of these different companies grow and their products grow and develop, and I've got to play a few, and it was really great to kind of approach it from this other point of view as a researcher and as a writer. So I wanted to start out with the concept of learning in different ways. And so how we can learn from movies or film or other avenues other than just books and lectures. And one of the ways that we approached that was looking at the history of edutainment and serious games, and also making sure that we put a clear definition on the difference between them, because there is a very large difference. Edutainment is mainly more of like the carrot on the stick motivation of getting people to learn. So you would go through all these exercises, and then as a reward, you would get to play a little game. Or it was a lot of very rote memorization of facts. You would put in the correct, answer to the question. There wasn't really any kind of analysis or synthesis of the information. And one of the things about serious games that differentiates it is that there is a lot of synthesis. There isn't just this one answer fits all. It's this exploration and this understanding on a deeper level rather than just remembering the correct answer to the questions. And so it was very important that we looked at this evolution of how we used games. And at first it was this reward mentality and this rote memorization. And then it turned into this more, well, how can we make it a deeper learning experience? And so then once we kind of differentiated that and what the VSGI does and what serious games are, then we delve into the history of the VSGI and its creation through Dr. Scott Martin and how he came up with the idea, and how he approached the Prince William County and George Mason University to get the funding and to get, the support for this new initiative. And then I broke down into a few of the case studies for VSGI companies. We looked at Little Arm Studios, who was our flagship company, made up of alumni from the game design program. Pretty much everybody actually on that team was an alumna of the computer game design program at George Mason University, and how they how they got this partnership with Fairfax County Firefighting, and how they developed this simulation of training for firefighters, and how it created this cheaper, safer alternative than burn buildings and things like that, and how they were capable of creating the most realistic physics for fire development. So if you opened a window, the smoke would flow different ways and the fire would grow in different ways depending upon airflow, and different materials burn at different rates, and fire spreads in different rates depending upon all of these different factors, and how they all included that in there. And it was really fascinating. The next one was hospital training games, which was hospital rescue emergency room. And it was all about how there's this large kind of void in training for hospital administration, and how we were trying to fill that void, or at least how hospital training games was trying to fill that void. They created this very fun, very cute kind of resource management simulation in regards to admin. And so you would have to hire the correct amount of people and keep in mind your patient flow and keep in mind your profit margins, because you do have to kind of make a little bit of money as a hospital to keep running, and all of that, and how that development went. And actually what was really fascinating in talking to the hospital training games team was we noticed that there was kind of a lacking of I guess a distribution a distribution method for serious games. Like entertainment games have Steam. It doesn't really require a whole lot for you to just pop your game up on Steam for the masses to enjoy, but there really isn't a equivalent for educational or serious games. And so I noticed that there was a lacking there, and I wanted to address that. Next, we went with Fly Guy and communities and schools. And so they developed the social emotional assessment development game, SEED. And what it is it's a series of mini games designed to assess young students, young learners, where they are in their social and emotional development. And that's really vital, because social and emotional development is what helps us regulate ourselves. It's how we figure out how we can be more, responsible, and how we can make sure our work is getting done, and how we can relate to others, and how we can work together as a community, and all of these things. And so what they use is this thing called Sanford Harmony, which is this assessment and these different kinds of programs to help young students develop their social and emotional needs. But they found that for younger kids, they really couldn't understand the questions. So when you ask an 8-year-old, how do you handle stress? They're not going to know how to really respond to that in a way that could help you. And so what was decided was, let's develop a game and let's have the kids play it, and we can assess how they react to these various mini games in these various situations, and that will tell us how they handle stress or how they handle bullying and those kinds of things. And so I believe they're developing right now a back-end server to take all of the different reactions and actions and all of these different things that these kids do during the game to assess where they stand socially and emotionally and be able to take them where they are and help them grow. And I thought that was really, really fascinating. Rather than just give you a written questionnaire, you could go through and play this game and it would give you better results because the kids wouldn't have to sit and think what stress means and what do they mean by bullying and things like that, because there's a lot of layers to those kinds of questions. So I thought that was really interesting. I got to play it a little bit. I played a little bit of a racing game where my friends would break down and I'd have to figure out, do I want to win the race or do I want to help my friends? And so it was one of those choices. It was really interesting. And then lastly, I looked at Citadel Studios. So they created an entertainment game called Legends of Aria. And it's a multiplayer, massive multiplayer game. But what I thought was interesting was there was a Australian teacher who taught coding um, for his students, and he was a big fan of Legends of Aria. He was a big fan of Ultima Online, and so he was already interested in this game. And then he thought, well, why don't I take it? Because you have the freedom to create your own servers and you have the freedom to kind of edit this world that you see fit, why don't I take that and let my students play around with it and code different things that they could fit into this world? And it was ideal because, in his words, and I agree completely, when you have students that are just learning how to code and they want to create these big, huge ideas and these big, huge games, they get really frustrated because you have to start at the beginning. So you have to code how the guy walks. You have to code how, fast he moves and what kind of animations are going to be used and all these different things. And it's very, very frustrating for a young programmer. And so here he has this pretty much, I want to say, like, bare bones world. Everything, for the most part, works. Everything is already there. So what you can do now is you can add all of these really fun, different things without having to worry about the little tiny bits of code. So, one student created a flaming sword that when you hit an enemy, they would explode into a pillar of fire, and it was really cool. But he didn't have to worry about attack speed. He didn't have to worry about all of these different things. He just got to program the sword and the effect that happened. And, groups of students were ending up getting together and creating things like, you know, mock-ups of Dota and, different multiplayer games in that aspect. One group of girls got together and created farming. So you could create a farm in this world and farm different kinds of plants, very Harvest Moon kind of thing. And so by allowing his students to do all of these different creative things in a world that already existed, they got to be excited and they got to be motivated. And what that resulted in was these students retaining more and learning more and being really excited to see what else that they could create, because they didn't have to worry about all of the nitty gritty that most programmers, which I'm sure that there are quite a few of you on here this talk now, they don't have to worry about that. And they just got to be creative and they got to be excited and do all of these wonderful things and not get frustrated by it. And so that was also really interesting to see. And so that was my chapter, was just examining all of these things.
Cool. So, with that in mind, we're going to shift gears a little bit. What's it like writing a book? And so this is kind of just me and Stephanie talking. It's we're not going to spend a lot of time on here because I think this topic is actually better suited for Q&A. So if you have questions about this topic or any of the stuff we talked about, we're going to open it up for Q&A in a few minutes. But this is just kind of our initial thoughts on it. And so I'll start. But so writing a book is a different process than you're used to. We've all done different types of writing in our life. I've done a lot of writing over my career in different forms. And I can remember doing things with, graduate school or undergraduate, or in my career at, with game design documents, or what you have to do here at George Mason, right? And there's different types of writing, but writing a book is different. If I've seen and experienced a lot of different things, and so I can put things together and get it out on the page. But at the same time, it's a lot about proving, right? Because it's like I can say something based on my experience, but at the same time, you have to show examples and you have to have all this, research and backing, and so you have to do a lot more proving of your point. Like even if you know for a fact something is one way, there's all this stuff that you basically have to bring together to make it easier for people to understand and to prove and show backing that it's not just you saying that, it's not just your opinion. And it's okay to have opinions too, but you're trying to, with this type of topic, you're trying to show, all this history, this learning, this application, and so that process is very different than I think that a lot of people probably expect. And I know even a few people on here have probably attempted to write books or written things that are similar. And yeah, so the number of references is huge, and I think Stephanie's was probably a lot more than mine. But I don't know. What are some of your thoughts on the writing a book, Stephanie? It's a long process.
It is. My only prior experience was, like you said, research papers and things
Yeah.
like that. And there's a lot more flexibility, honestly, in a research paper over the chapter. I would, I wrote it like I was used to writing research papers, and when I would get my edits back, it would be like, where's the proof of this? And where's the proof of that? And I'm like, I have to do that too. I felt like every other sentence I was putting in references to other
Right.
things, which is good. It's good. It's good to back up what you have, but it was a very different process than what I was used to.
Yeah, no, I agree because I'm a very casual writer by nature. I tend to write in a line, in a way that's very casual, and so you have to shift the mentality because of the topic and the subject matter some, right? And so that was an interesting take. Like, how do I take the casual, show some of my history and what I've experienced in with all this other stuff, or this, these people that have done 100-page reports, that have done all these surveys and analysis. It's like and so I'm using them as reference, but at the same time trying to tie it into other things, and so that's a very interesting process. So
Yeah. It was so how did you start, I would say?
how did I start?
Yeah.
um my To be honest, my first thing was I wanted to find some kind of antidote. Like, it sounds like I'm a poison, right? I'm saying it
Anecdote.
wrong. Yes, that's what I'm trying to say. That kind of tied into my chapter and what I wanted to talk about, right? So my first thing was like, what in my life can I use as this metaphor for everything that we're talking about? And so I narrowed in on a part of my history when I was like a teenager, even, right? Where I was first introduced to computers and learning from them indirectly. And so that was kind of because I wanted a framing kind of thought in my head of where is my take on this, and that's where I started. What about you?
So at first I didn't really have an anecdote. I gathered up all of my interviews and everything like that, and then I just started putting information on the page. And then when I realized that it was missing that kind of personal touch, we were right in the middle of quarantine, and Hamilton had just come out on Disney Plus, and everybody was making this big deal about it. And I'm like, you know what? Why don't we take what's going on right now and apply it? And so I actually used Hamilton to talk about how you can find education anywhere, including, Broadway musicals.
I still haven't watched it, even though you referenced it in the book. I still haven't watched it, but.
I mean,
So
if you like
yeah,
musicals, it's
yeah,
okay.
yeah. Okay,
It's just it's hard for me to like it's hard for me to pay attention because everything is sung, but that's
right.
besides the point.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, so writing a book, it's a weird process, right? And in our book, we do quotes and we do all these other things that tie together, and it's all about how do you mix, what you bring as an author to the book with what you're using as this reference, and how do you make it interesting, hopefully, to other folks. And so that's why, with this inaugural talk, we wanted to talk about this process and we wanted to talk about what we were doing. And now we didn't do the bulk of the book. That was Dr. Scott Martin, and he could probably spend much longer talking about the other chapters, but we wanted to give you some insight into it. And I think it's cool topics, and I think it's fun. But we thought this would be a great introduction. Um, and so now, really, it's about, what do you want to know, right? Like, um, what is on your guys' mind, right? What based on this? So raise your hand, as Riza said, or if you want to, just put something in chat. We'll read it out and we'll answer it. It can be about the book chapters. It can be about the process. It can be about, whatever you feel based on what we talked about. So, or if you have questions about things that we just haven't even thought about. So we'll try to answer. Come on, don't be shy. We've still got a few more minutes. I know we started a little late. When will the book be released? God, Reza, why are you asking the hard questions? I think we're finishing up the chapters now, and then it has to go through some final, editorial and things like that. So I'm guessing, hopefully, maybe spring of next year.
Yeah, that's what I
As
was
soon
gonna
as
say.
as soon as we know a date, we'll let people know that when it's coming out, and I'm sure there'll be a book party, and people that are local will be invited. This is assuming, of course, that we can get together.
Yeah.
With COVID, right? Maybe it'll be a virtual book party. We'll see. But we'll go from there. So, what else? Thank you. Come on, guys. Questions. We got time. Can you talk about the moments? I'm reading these out because we're recording it and the chat gets recorded separately. So we want to make sure that anybody who will watch this later understands why we're talking about something. So the question is, can you talk about the moments where you connect learners, a challenge to the content or learning in a game as an MMO or in the case studies, and how is it successfully accomplished? Do you want? I know, Stephanie. I know that they were doing that a little bit with Citadel. Did you want to talk about that, or do you want me to take that?
Um, I'm still trying to kind of wrap my mind around the
Digest the
question.
question. Sure. So basically, the idea is, how do you get learners to connect to content, right? And I think kind of part of that answer is, it depends on what you're using as the learning, and what you're using as the resource. So, like, if you're taking a game, for example, like Legends of Aria, then you're figuring out where that tool and that structure and that resource and what's available in it and what it can allow you to do will fit with what you're trying to teach. And I know that, what Stephanie was talking about, like, coding worked very well because Legends of Aria uses a scripting language called Lua, that is very simple compared to some of the others. It's still logic and it's still coding, but you're able to do things quickly and see them occur within the game. And so by knowing that about the game, and knowing that they wanted to teach coding, they were able to marry them. And so that's what you find in a lot of cases, right? So if you're taking existing games, you have to figure out, what do they offer and how do I use it? Because there's games like Assassin's Creed Odyssey, and I think actually at George Mason University, one of the teachers for historic civilizations, I saw this recently in one of the newsletters, was actually using that game to teach about, maybe it was Origins, but it was teaching about ancient Greece, and they were playing the game through Twitch and then talking about all the stuff that's in this, because it's a very accurate representation. And then if you're designing a game, it's like, how do you build this resource to get to the teaching? So hopefully that answers that.
I mean, it really depends on what you're teaching, what you're using, what your students are willing to do. I read studies where a lot of students were very um, kind of I guess gun shy about using games. And even though they enjoyed games in their free time, adding it to education is like, well, now you're taking the one thing that I really enjoy in my free time and now you're making it school and like, So I mean, there's different studies of that. It was really interesting for me to see a study where different teachers were using different actual entertainment games for education. So they would use like The Sims to figure out how to balance self-care and free time with all of the responsibilities of running a household, and Roller Coaster Tycoon with physics and business and things like that, and how to run those kinds of things. And so, it really depends on what you're looking for versus what you have available to you versus what your students are going to be willing to kind of meet you halfway on. Um, but I think that you can probably kind of take any game with the right context and with the right background and use it for education.
Yep. So let's see. We got another question from Scott. Crazy. Who's the publisher? That would be Rutledge.
Yes.
So Molly asks, is there an opportunity to try some of these games out? A few of them, absolutely. For example, there is Legends of Aria. I posted the link in chat for anybody. And I think that Little Arms Studios has a playable trial of their drone game. And we'll post that link in a second. I just don't have it handy to copy and paste right now. And the other ones are in various states of being shopped around or testing, so not really. Let's see, RX Peanuts. Do you think that these serious games will be implemented into general education? And if so, how long do you think before serious games are properly integrated in the curriculum? They are now. I mean, what was that statistic that you had, Stephanie, as far as how many people are using serious games?
Oh gosh, it was quite a bit.
Like
I want
70 or 70%, or
the statistic was 78% of K through 12 teachers use some kind of game, whether
right?
that's a serious game, an electronic game, or something like that, but they use some kind of game. So games are already in education, but these particular serious games, I don't know, like Legends of Aria kind of was being
Mm-hmm.
used by this one teacher. And the rest of them are more simulations for training, for like
Okay.
job training, except for maybe Seed, which is more of an assessment. But I think that, serious games are already here. Being properly integrated probably has more to do with teachers being willing to stretch their curriculum and
Yep.
figure it out.
Yeah, I mean, the biggest things we see are, getting the funding for the game if it costs money, making sure that the teachers are technologically advanced enough to
To use
handle it
them.
more so than the students. And then, it's always that thing that I think we came back to is like making sure that those games fit into the curriculum. And I mean, that's the hardest part as a teacher, right? It's like you have a book that you teach from, and it's everything. But now, if I'm bringing in all these other elements, how do I work that together into a lesson plan that works? And that's taken people time. So, and then Nick talked about civilization being used for education.
Yes.
Scott asked about assessment results from the seed game, which they're still.
They're developing the back end, and
Yep.
I believe Kevin Leary, who works with communities and schools, who I spoke to for the chapter, said that he was estimating about 18 months to build the back end of that game to be able to assess the results.
Right. Yeah, they've done a little initial testing, mostly about usability and things like that, to kind of see where they're going. They're right now going through an expansion of the game that's hopefully going to end and be done this fall, and then they'll get it into the hands of the students to hopefully test in the next year, and we'll get some results back. Then we got the links, and then Ying Ying talks about personalized learning being in here from the 70s. Cool. So we're still kind of on time, even though we started a few minutes late to accommodate people coming on. Any last questions? Anything that anybody is just dying to know before we kind of wind it down? I mean, I appreciate everybody coming out. I appreciate people listening. You know, it's taking time out of your day, and it's hopefully an interesting topic. But
Yeah.
any final questions? Going once? Going twice? Cool. Well, I appreciate everybody coming out. Like I said, Stephanie and myself, thanks you.
Yes,
The
thank
rest
you
of the
very much.
folks here at the VSGI, thank you. We have a ton of other speaker series coming up. And the reasons I think is mentioning some of them in the chat. But if you go to our speaker series site on vsgi.gmu.edu, you can see the rest. And they're going to run the gamut. And also, if there are ideas for speakers or topics that you want to see in this virtual series, please, please send us an email. You can, there's a contact us on our website. You're welcome to send them to me directly. My email's in chat, jkc9@gmu.edu. The whole purpose of this is to open it up to as many people to talk about tech and game and innovation. And that's the purpose behind this. So if you liked it, tell other people. If you know of stuff that other people will like, tell us so we can get more people. Our goal is to make this go further. Other than that, thank you all. You're welcome to take off. We're going to be stopping the recording in a minute and all that wonderful stuff. Thanks, guys.
Thank you so much. Thank you.